Welcome to It's Complicated week 1 of a brand new series. And this is for groups, an opportunity for you to take the conversation from the main gathering into your groups and go further with that. And David, thank you for sitting down with us after the gathering. You jumped right into the story, and I love the story that you used from scripture, but we have to go first to the story that you used about you and Ruth. So you guys meeting one another, was it at college that you met?
Texas Tech. Yeah, I was a junior. She was a freshman.
Yeah. And so y'all, so you were going after, you said that you weren't the only guy going after her. So you talked about the first date as around February the 10th, and you get her these flowers, but there were other vases in that room when she showed. I wanted to ask you, because I love this story, was there real competition, or were you like, no, I'm good, I'm the front runner?
So see, actually, I asked her out her freshman year.
Yeah.
To a football game, and she already had another date and turned me down.
Okay.
So it was a year and a half later before we had our first date.
Okay.
And yeah, I think they're actually part of the reason why we didn't try to date that first year and a half. There were other people involved on both sides during that year and a half, and it wasn't worth pursuing.
Yeah.
And so anyway, yeah, there probably were.
The future bears out. I mean, history
somebody
is
won.
telling. Yeah, somebody
right.
won. Texas is
Not
winning.
that it's a competition, but
yeah. Well, I love
actually
that.
It was a competition.
Yeah, of course it was. He was trying to win. But so then you said just a little bit ago, you talked about how it was quick from then on. You knew, like, I'm in, she's in. So how long were y'all dating, then engaged, and then you're married?
So our first date was February 10th, and it was like a 12-hour date. And so we had to drive 100 and something miles. I was speaking at a camp that I'd been a part of.
Okay.
And so a lot of time in the car. She heard my story at the camp. And so we probably, after the end of that night, each of us later would say we both knew, okay, this is a person I'm probably going to marry. So I wouldn't recommend that, and I didn't recommend that for our kids, nor would I recommend it for other people.
Right.
But we kind of knew then. And and so I would say, so first, when we started talking about a wedding date, she and her mom wanted it to be way, way off. And so then to speed up the process, I kind of said, well, wouldn't it be cool if we got married on the same day that we actually had our first date, February 10th, a year from now?
Yeah.
She thought it was very romantic and fun to do it that way. I just thought it was a lot sooner than what they were planning.
So
I was willing to go along with February 10th. So
there's something in that story, I have to say, and it's not exactly the same, but you use the story in the teaching. You talked all about Jacob and Rachel's story. It really is Jacob's story, Rachel, Leah, Laban. Like it's very, very messy. But you talk about, like, you didn't want to wait, and here's a guy who had to wait. So I want to get into that story. The story's a mess. It could be beautiful, you even said. It could have this Hallmark-esque feature to it, except everything that followed after and a lot of the backstory that led up. So is that why you picked? I mean, Jacob goes for Rachel, gets Leah. That's not what he wanted. Waits, gets Rachel, but has to work even longer. But then he's still got to go and face his demons back where he's from with his brother and the vengeance. Is that why you picked it in a series about It's Complicated?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, it's the perfect example of how complicated life is. Yeah. And as bizarre as his story sounds, I mean, I could sit there and I could tell you story after story of people in all of our circles. Mm-hmm. And probably if we dug deep enough in our circles, in our stories, we're going to find stuff you go, that's kind of bizarre. I can't believe that.
Right.
And I remember growing up, my mom would oftentimes say, I'd a lot rather have our life than somebody else's life that looked perfect on the outside, because at least she knew what was going on in our life.
Right.
And she said, nobody's got a perfect life and everybody's complicated. And so part of it was to say, all of our lives are a mess.
Yep.
So let's just call it what it is. And the cool thing is God can still step into that mess and do something about it. If we could learn not to make some of the stupid choices that Jacob made or that we made, they wouldn't be near as complicated. But in spite of that, God still steps into our mess and meets us where we are.
I want to ask you, though, like, stepping back for just a second too, do you think people are surprised by how many dysfunctional or relationally dysfunctional kind of couples and families and whatever there are in the Bible, like how honest it is? Do you think that surprises people?
I think it does if you're not familiar with the Bible, because I think people think that the Bible is this book of perfection. Yeah. And yet it's a story. If you think about it, you step back, it's a book about imperfection and God, the perfect God, stepping into that imperfection. Yeah. And so it's not really full of any perfect people other than Jesus himself. It's full of people that are really, really messed up. And that's what makes it a beautiful story. Yeah.
And that's what makes it so trustworthy. I know that sounds crazy, but historians would even say, like, it's not lying about.
Why would you tell that if you were trying to lie?
Right. Yeah. I can't put on a good face with that one.
Exactly.
So you said, and I love that as a segue, you talk about that in the midst of our mess, if we wouldn't have chosen Jacob's way, which Jacob's way was often to just trying to figure it out himself and use his conniving kind of cleverness, or his mom's back in his previous story. In the midst of mess, you said, seek God first. And I want to ask you how does, if you just really put some practicality, how can seeking God first, if we're in the middle of a mess, how can that help us? What even comes to mind from your life or just in general?
So I think what we tend to do, I'll speak for myself personally. What I tend to do is I find myself in a mess and I start strategizing in my head how I'm going to get out of this. And if I can come up with a strategy, then I'm fine. And oftentimes I won't even talk to God about it because I think I've got this licked, and I keep going. If I get desperate, that's when I tend to go, oh, God, I can't figure this out. I need you. Problem is, when I think I've got it figured out and I'm charging ahead with my perfect plan, it often is very imperfect. I just don't know it until 5 or 6 steps down the road or several iterations down the road. And so all of a sudden, all of these steps that I thought were so good have just added to the complexity. And if I would just pause and say, okay, God, I think I got this one figured out, but show me, help me out here, then I think that'd make a huge difference. And I'd save myself a whole lot of heartache. I think we would save ourselves a whole lot of heartache. Well,
I love that you said that too, because as I'm thinking so many steps down the road, I can't plan for all those eventualities or the way God is not just trying to work in me, he's trying to work in and through me in something else. That all I can see is, here's my strategy for this, just for me or for me and my closest few. So for you to point that out too is he's got far more awareness of what he wants to do if we would let him. It's just a question of will we get out of the way.
And that's part of why we were using the phrase, everyone wins when we choose to seek God first. And so you look at Jacob's life, and his life was already a mess before he was even a teenager, because his mom and dad had already figured out who their favorite was. And so he's working there. That's working against him. But had they not done that, it wouldn't have affected Jacob. It wouldn't have affected Esau, which wouldn't have affected Rachel, which wouldn't have affected Leah. I mean, there's this chain reaction.
It's crazy.
That just kind of goes on. But if I'll pull back, I can stop that chain reaction. That's why everybody wins when I decide to seek God first.
I think it's an important point. I want to make this as an aside because you just said it. So we're talking to singles, we're talking to couples, we're talking to parents. I mean, it's relationships, but parents, this one's more of an aside than the focus of all of this. And that is what you said. Mom and dad chose their favorite already, and they set off a chain reaction. Instead of going, God, we want to see what you'll do in both of these kids' lives, and we're going to hold them both up to you and say, we want to help them follow you and do their best in their life to follow you. It was very clearly favorites. And as you said, you can see in the story, set off some chain reactions that didn't end well or easily, and both of them had to figure that out afterward. A lot of parents probably save heartache if they would figure that one out.
Exactly.
But I want to draw it back then into, and so singles, I have lots of singles friends here at LCBC, whether volunteering or in our community, and really want to point out one of the things that you said, and this is so important, and they've told me this, so it's not us giving a pat answer, but you made the point, of course, seek God first in the midst of your mess. Why? Because God is all that you need. Why would that be? And they've shared this with me, that that's a value they want to carry. Why would you see that as a value that, man, as a single, you want to carry God as all you need and not thinking you're going to find it outside of him?
And, I'd say real quick too, Dave, when you talk about having single friends, I think the population of LCBC is 45% single.
Okay.
And so we tend to think singles in a certain age group.
Yeah, right.
It's very broad. And so almost half of our congregation is single. So what was your question
so
again?
the question, is really going, why is the God all that you need part so important in that main point?
So I think our tendency, and this doesn't stop when you get married, our tendency as individuals is to look to somebody else to fill the needs or holes that I have. And we've got a hole in all of us. That's why God sends Jesus to fill that hole. But our nature is to get other people to fill it. And so when I'm single, I'm looking for the right person to be my spouse. When I'm married, I'm still looking for my spouse somehow to fill those holes in me. And where we get disillusioned, even in marriage, is that person's not doing it. And all of a sudden we're surprised. And it's not going to happen. And so if we can figure that out when we're single, so much better than waiting and figuring it out once we're married. Because it's not going to happen. God's the only one that can do that. And so I think from a single standpoint and a married, I don't know that I'd even differentiate between the two. All of us need to figure out it's God that's going to fill that hole, nobody else. And so quit trying to put extra pressure on a future date or a future husband or wife that you think might be out there. And if you're married, quit trying to put that pressure on your husband or your wife or your past spouse that you bailed out on because they didn't somehow fill your hole and meet your needs. It never was their fault. That was never their job to do that. That's God's job.
And that is so important to say, because this isn't about just relationships that you're currently in or wanting in the future, but also to be able, as I'm hearing you say, be able to reflect on previous relationships And if you don't heal from that, if you don't learn from that, then you're going to carry that into the next one.
Exactly.
So what I hear you saying is, if there is a previous one that didn't go well, whether it was dating, whether it was marriage, then learn from that so that you're not taking that expectation. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah. Otherwise, you spend your whole life chasing after this brass ring that you're never going to catch.
Yeah.
And you think that there's that ultimate person out there that's going to meet everything that you think you need in life.
Right.
They're not there.
Yeah.
There's only one, and that's God.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as you're chasing that, you're going to be disappointed and life's going to be miserable for you. So.
Yeah. You went on, and I'm so grateful for the way that you took the trajectory of these points and then the story that we shared of David and Blake. But you went on and you talked about, and this is the one that I would want to transition and kind of talk about David and Blake here. But in general, you said one of the reasons why to seek God first is he's never going to reject you. And reject is a strong word for many. Like that is a fear, the fear of rejection, or I've experienced rejection and now I have a fear. Maybe it didn't before. But what is it about rejection in relationship? And it probably plays back into what you were just saying. Could you speak to that a little bit about why you chose to use that point as God's never going to reject you? Of course, it's true about Jesus, but why within a relationship series?
So isn't that really our biggest fear in any relationship, is that I'm going to be rejected? And if I'm rejected, what that means is I didn't meet your standard. I didn't meet your desires. Whatever you were hoping from me, I didn't meet. And whether it was my looks, my personality, my whatever it was, my mental capacity, somehow I didn't measure up. And so I think we all fear rejection. And I mean, what worse words can you hear than I don't want you? Yeah. And I want to be the one that decides. Like if you and I are friends and we're going to end the friendship, I want to end it. I don't want you to end it because I'm going to reject you before you reject me. And sometimes we'll play those silly games where I get a sense that you're about to reject me, so I'm going to do it first and move you on. So there's this fear that we all live with of rejection. And the cool thing is God doesn't do that to us. And again, he's the only one that doesn't. And so you can put all your hope in somebody else, but at some point you're going to get burned. At some point you'll be disappointed. Yeah. Do you remember the story Christmas Eve, Patrick and Candace, the couple, and he talked about the struggle he had with alcohol and his alcoholism. Candace stepped back and she said, you know, I learned from this as well. And she said, one of the things I was doing to Patrick unwittingly was I was expecting him to be everything for me. And he couldn't do it. And she felt like she was putting pressure on him, which because he wasn't measuring up in part, and he wasn't blaming her that she said this, but in part she felt like he was being driven to alcohol because he couldn't live up to what she was expecting out of him. And so it's that whole expectation thing and rejection, not measuring up. Well,
and I've heard that story, and I'm so glad you brought up a different story because we shared David and Blake's story tonight. And their story was her feeling kind of a rejection or the value of their relationship pulling away because he was away so often and she was there with the kids. How often is that the story? That one is left from the other and then they start feeling that distance, not just geographically, but then in their intimacy, their relationship. But I remember hearing another couple, and it's got to be so many that have shared the story where the expectation was here, at least in their mind. And so if they didn't measure up, and so they're feeling rejected inside, and there it is again, as you shared with their story with Candace, just realizing, wait, I'm holding a standard. I'm asking you to be something for me, to fill something in my life that only God can. How can I keep pushing you into that place and that position?
And I almost wonder, Dave, we tend to, in any relationship, you said put a standard real high. And we think as long as I can maintain that standard, I'll be good in the relationship. And I don't know, maybe we need to flip it where the expectation is, I'm going to mess up, you're going to mess up, but no matter how low it gets, we're still going to be together. Instead of saying, as long as we stay up here, we're going to be together. So it's almost flipping kind of our expectations.
So that we actually have something to build on instead of something to try to, we can easily fall from.
We're all going to fall.
I want to kind of bring this to a close here because we have a whole series ahead of us. This is just week 1 and we're getting off to a really strong start. But you're starting off very importantly with the point of, we want to point to God. We don't want to point to, here's how you tweak this, fix that, finagle that, figure that out. Is there reason behind that really for the whole arc of the series for us to be looking forward to what is the heart that we want to start thinking to set a great ground for the rest of the series?
So I think, Dave, and you kind of just said it, bottom line, if I'm not the person I'm supposed to be, that God wants me to be, then it doesn't matter what relationship I'm in, it's still going to struggle. And I can be real frustrated with you that you're not measuring up to what I want, but it's not even about you, it's about me. And how do I become the person that's going to be able to be successful in any relationship, whether it's a marriage or a friendship or a roommate or business, whatever. And so I think the series of the focus of the series isn't so much on here's how to be the best husband, here's how to be the best whatever. It's really here's how to be the best you. you. And if you can be the best you, then you can be in a wide array of different relationships that you're going to be successful in. It's still going to be complicated. It's still going to be hard. I mean, what I loved about David and Blake's story, and it's what all of our stories are. But I mean, you got parents that, if I was a parent, I don't know that I'd be excited that my daughter was going to marry some guy from the Czech Republic because she's going to move to the Czech Republic.
Right, she's gonna leave.
So I mean, all these different little factors, it's just complicated. And I can't change that, and you can't change that. We can't stop our lives from being complicated. What we can change is how I handle those complications. What we can change is how just the person that I am. And if I can change that, then I can withstand lots of complications.
And that's what we have to go with for week 1. Such a powerful start to a whole series. Remember, we have a whole series ahead of us, but we hope that as you get into conversation as a group, it is not about what I can fix in someone else. It's about what I can start doing to focus my attention on God and what He wants to do in and through me.